And now, let's move on to our first keynote speaker. Our current digital rules are mainly drawn from the e-privacy regulation in 2001. 20 years ago. Therefore, 10 months ago, the European Commission introduced two new big legislative packages to modernize how we look at big tech and also the protection of users of the internet. And here today to speak about the Digital Single Service Act and the Digital Market Act is the head of the cabinet of the European Commission Vice President Vera Jourova. So please welcome Renate Nikolay. Hello, Ms. Nikolay. Thank you very much for being here today with us. Now, before I give you the floor for your speech, I would like to ask you, because yesterday we had the first Trade and Technology Council between the EU and the US, and I wanted to ask you, what is for you the main takeaway of this first meeting?
The main takeaway is that the EU and the US in this first ever Trade and Technology Council agreed to work together towards more convergence in how we tackle some of the really important issues in the digital transformation. Whether you take AI, whether you take human-centric risk-based AI, whether you take the regulatory approach on how to deal with platforms, I think this is a super basis to work on. There is now a real work program for all the working groups that have been created. There's a meeting point to kind of, get into the details of the work and to meet again in a couple of months, where hopefully we will see the results of that bigger convergence. It's a conversation that is happening, of course, in Brussels based on our legislative proposals, but at the same time also in Washington. And I think it's an important moment for partners like us to kind of, work on these things together to see how we can come to more similar principles, because it might not be exactly copy and paste of what we do here in the US, but certainly it's worth comparing notes.
Absolutely. This is all about what we are going to be doing today, but I want to listen to your speech straight away. So here we are. I leave you with Renate Nikolay.
Thank you so much. Let me start by stating the obvious. The future will be digital, and in the EU, we embrace this, of course. Commission President von der Leyen has declared this current decade as the digital decade. She has also said recently that the digital issue was the break or make issue. So when talking about the digital transition and the digital future, I think it's worth looking back for a moment to see where we come from, to then address how we best kind of, deal with the issues for the future. In the beginning, there was this promise of an ever-connected society with innovation, where everybody could be connected worldwide, where, we would have grassroots politics and participatory democracies. Let's not forget that we celebrated that the Arab Spring was kind of organized on social media, that we had election campaigns more and more moving on social media, where, newcomers could have a place which they would not have had without that means. But I would say that the face of that kind of internet naivety is long gone, because since then, we have seen the downsides of digital transformation. We've grown up in it. We've seen disinformation campaigns, hate speech, radicalization, division in society. Some of these phenomena are, of course, not unique to the digital sphere. They also exist offline. But what is worrying and new is the amplification and the speed of reach online. A COVID conspiracy theory goes viral for millions with a few clicks. Targeted misinformation spread in a crucial phase in an election campaign can turn the outcome. These are issues that we cannot simply ignore if we do want to avoid harm for our societies and for our democracies. I think the storm on Capitol Hill early January was probably the climax of these worrying trends. So what needs to be done? As already mentioned, in Europe, we have decided to act. We have seen that the current regulatory framework was simply not fit for purpose. We want to put order in the internet and stop its Wild West. This means, first of all, holding platforms accountable for their role in it. They are not only the pipe through which information flows. Their opaque system of algorithms to target users, to incentivize them to stay connected, to build their profits on the exploitation of the user's data, makes them an actor in this. So we want to responsibilize them. We have in Europe gained some experience in working with platforms to address, for instance, hate speech online or disinformation. We've done this in self-regulatory approaches. Our Code of Conduct on Illegal Hate Speech of 2016, or our Code of Practice on Disinformation from 2018, were important steps, and they led to some good results. For instance, they led to a better cooperation between platforms and fact-checkers. And they also led to faster takedown of illegal content. But they have not gone far enough, because there are simply limits to self-policing. And no other sector is entirely self-policed, so why should the digital sector be? This is why in Europe we presented at the end of last year our digital rulebook, consisting of the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, and the European Democracy Action Plan. Let me outline the key features. The Digital Services Act imposes responsibilities on platforms. It is about transparency instead of opaque systems of algorithms. It is about supervision and auditing instead of self-regulation only. It is about effective redress possibilities for users. And it is about sanctions if illegal hate speech or illegal content is not taken down. The Digital Markets Act deals with the specific role of platforms as gatekeepers. It includes a list of do's and don'ts, all of them aiming at preserving fair competition in the market. And the European Democracy Action Plan complements this in order to address, for instance, disinformation and election integrity. Because in dealing with these, we have to be very mindful that we need also to protect the freedom of speech to avoid any form of censorship. Let me explain this on the basis of disinformation. Disinformation as such is not illegal. Lying is not illegal. This makes it different from the illegal speech and the illegal content. But disinformation can, of course, cause harm in society. Let's, for instance, think about the COVID vaccination disinformation campaigns that have prevented people from getting vaccinated, that can affect public health and even lives. If we want to protect the freedom of speech, a solution, an effective solution on addressing disinformation cannot simply be taking down the content. It is more about equipping us in a whole society approach to address this phenomenon, to counter it, to challenge it. So debunking, fact-checking, labeling come into play. It's a lot about the channels, the platforms, but it's not only about the channels. In order to address the phenomenon of disinformation, you need to look at the sources, the channels, and the targets. We have to be open about where the sources of disinformation and misinformation campaigns come. We've done so when we addressed misinformation and disinformation in COVID times by addressing, for instance, and by explicitly saying that there are malicious actors such as China and Russia engaged in campaigns. We address the channels via our regulatory approach, but we also have to address the targets. We have to make sure we invest in educating society, make it digitally literate, because we need a society that consists of people that think before sharing, that verify facts before repeating them. And we need, of course, independent media to play their role in it all. So Europe follows quite a unique approach in hard regulation on platforms, but also effective multi-stakeholder response on disinformation in order to protect our society with full respect for the freedom of speech. That's why we currently work with the platforms on a new disinformation pact to make it more robust so that it can be part of the future Digital Services Act. And we want to inspire others when doing so. We hope that our regulatory framework will be in place in 2022. We have inspired others with our data protection regime. It has become a global standard, and we would like to foster the debate also on this matter. Allow me a word on the specific challenge of election manipulation. Scandals such as the one around Cambridge Analytica have shown the complexity around the tech ad industry. The massive micro-targeting techniques combined with the dynamic optimization process has become very opaque and makes it impossible for users today to know why they receive an ad, who is behind, who paid for it, We will change that. We will change some of it already with the Digital Services Act for commercial advertising, with the strong rules on transparency and supervision. But we need to go further, in our view, in the context of political advertising. Because when political advertising leads to targeted ads at specific groups, using sensitive data, creating echo chambers at crucial debates in election campaigns, hence avoiding a public debate on politics that can harm the whole fair election process. We're convinced that in these situations, we need to protect the public agora and the public discourse more. And this is why we're working currently on a legislative initiative that will complement both the Digital Services Act and the General Data Protection Regulation, the Political Ads Initiative, by imposing higher obligations for political advertising. And this would not only address platforms, this would address everybody that is in the production chain of that political ad. We're thinking of higher level of real-time transparency, higher level of possibilities for the user to request information and to oppose advertisement, limitations to the traffic of the ads by imposing borders and safeguards on micro-targeting and amplification techniques. We are working on presenting this proposal by the end of November. And we are also thinking of a broad scope, not only the classical political ad, but also to address the issues ads that is used with a political end in mind. We're pioneers on that, and I know the world is watching us on that because it's quite new. Talking about the world, we've just touched base already on the Trade and Technology Council. I think it's of pivotal importance that partners, allies like the EU and US work more closely together on that. We are bound by the same values. We want tech to serve the individual rights. We don't want tech to kind of, supervise and control society. And that's why if we join forces and if we make the Tech and Technology Council really work, we can pave the way for the future together. So I'm very glad about that. But I think I would even like to kind of develop it a step further. Because in the end, what I believe strongly is that in the future, we need an international rules-based order for the digital future. Sort of principles, governance structures that we can all, rally behind, a sort of a digital Bretton Woods structure, really. That's my dream. That might not happen today, but it's definitely something that I would want to work us for tomorrow. And I think in Europe, by advancing on our unique mix of hard legislation, multi-stakeholder, co-regulatory approaches, I think we can set a good example. By working together, we can kind of show that we can turn the tide, that we can tame the negative impact of digital revolution and digital transition, and we can focus on what is also necessary, the innovation, the skills development, and of course, the huge investment that we all need in our digital future. So I hope that Europe can pave the way together with the US and other allied partners for a better digital future together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Nikolay. We have a few questions coming already from our audience, and I would like to encourage the audience to keep on sending us questions, because this is meant to be a conversation, an open conversation where everyone can contribute to that. But I want to thank you first, because I think you set out a little bit of the challenges and the opportunities that lies ahead, and that obviously need to be tackled both by the public authorities, but also by civil society, and this is what we're trying to do today here. Now, I would like to ask you, because we have a question coming here about why do you only focus on political ads and not every single ad on the internet?
We have kind of, when we designed the Digital Services Act, we wanted to kind of increase overall the transparency. And that means when you look at the advertising kind of part in the Digital Services Act, it is quite a sea change in terms of, the strings pulled to the business model of the platforms from today. They will have to be much more transparent on their algorithms. They will have to give much more information to the user. They will be audited, especially the big ones, over time. So there's a real stress test on their business model. And we thought that this is the right kind of context for commercial advertising, because that's us as consumers, also with our choices, with our kind of, preferences, but nevertheless protected. When it comes to the political advertising, we wanted to go a step deeper because in election campaigns, this is really about protecting the public debate. Here, even though we're talking about, private players, in reality, we all know how much, we've seen it in recent election campaigns again, how much, campaigning has moved away from offline to online. We have lots of rules for campaigning offline. We have no rules for campaigning online. And we want to kind of keep this a little bit more in an equilibrium. And that's why we thought the Digital Services Act simply doesn't go far enough. And where we want to go deeper, because some of the techniques that we see, especially on the micro-targeting and the rapid amplification, can be so cumbersome and so harmful, especially so close to election. And that's why we thought this is too much for the commercial side as such, but quite relevant for the political ads side, but not in the strict, limited sense of political ads, but in a broader sense, also covering the issues ads. That will really have an impact on the business model of the platforms. And I think that will be a very important weapon to protect our democracy better and to ensure we have fair elections also in a digital space.
I'm very glad that you mentioned the question of election, because I'm going to spoil a little bit of our audience, but we are going to have a session talking about this issue indeed later today. So it's very good to touch upon this issue. Going back to this question, and considering that you had yesterday that first Trade and Technology Council with the US, do you think that the US is going to go in the same sense when it comes to political ads? And also because you mentioned before the question of the capital. So how do you see this moving forward in the US?
As I said, I think that the conversations are very similar on both sides of the Atlantic. I've been involved in the Privacy Shield negotiations, for instance, so I know a little bit about, how we are convergent on the one hand, but how we also, on the other hand, have very different approaches on regulation. But for instance, on political advertising, there is already the US Honest Ads Act. So they have already, some rules in a way on political advertising. What we are aiming at goes a bit deeper and is, of course, built into our structure of the digital regulatory framework with the Digital Services Act that I have described. So it's never about, copy pasting. But I think what I see with this Biden administration and what has been represented yesterday in the Trade and Technology Council, which has, of course, also many other topics, but there is room for a real strong cooperation on these matters, much more room than there was with the previous administration. And that's very, very comforting to see, because we are in a geopolitical context where, there's a bit of a race on who sets the right standards in the future for this digital future. And I think those who are departing from the same general principles and values that should govern this digital world should join up and should kind of try to be the determining factor.
Absolutely. You're going to have a very intense negotiation when it comes to both packages, which are enormous and they touch upon many very sensitive issues. You're very positive in thinking that you're going to have an agreement by 22. I hope that that's true indeed. But how do you envisage these negotiations after putting the proposal on the table? Where do you see the resistance and where do you see the opportunity to move forward with those proposals?
It's always complex to do legislative work in the EU because, we have to come to a deal with, ministers of 27 member states. We have to come to a deal with the European Parliament with many different political groups in it. I've been involved very intensely in the data protection regulation discussions. Nobody thought we would ever get there, and we got there. And I'm equally positive about this. I think there is really a push to kind of put order there, because we see the need. There's also quite an, I know you will be discussing lobbying also on these CSA matters, but, even though there is a lot of lobbying, as in any kind of, highly sensitive and highly important legislative files, what I feel when talking to stakeholders also from the business side, that there's also quite a lot of appetite, to actually have harmonized rules. Because what's the alternative, really? The alternative would be that you would have a spaghetti bowl of individual kind of initiatives in individual member states. That's not really suitable for, the biggest, single market who we are. And I think there's maybe one thing that is a big difference for us compared to the US. We have done the harmonized data protection rules. So this was a little bit of a foundation that we built. Even so, of course, the starting point was different. We already had 20 years of experience with data protection rules in the EU, but we harmonized them much more. We made them fit for that kind of, digital age we are in. And I think that's been kind of an important Rubicon that we passed together, where we showed we can do this. And I see the digital kind of regulatory framework very much building on this.
Absolutely. This push that we see sometimes coming from the EU, influencing all the countries into moving forward in that direction. And indeed, for that, it's going to be very important to have this dialogue with the US. We have a very concrete question coming from our audience on the question of ads. And this is, why not outlaw personalized ads completely? This is funding the data trading and violating industry. This is ad money or media desperately need from context ads and from functioning democracy that is wasted on companies destroying our society. It's a very strong statement. How do you react to that?
Yeah, I know the debate out there. I mean, as I said, we are in the middle of kind of, preparing our, proposal on this. And we had a public consultation where we got a lot of kind of, very valuable input. And I know that there's a huge kind of, criticism about the ad tech sector in general. I'm always from the, general point of view of policymaking, more of the view that it's better to kind of, create a framework with responsibility and clear rules so that people have to, kind of do what they do in this framework. The problem about the ad tech industry right now is that there are simply no limits. And this opacity about it, that makes it so complex. And that's where Cambridge Analytica showed it so clearly. And that's what we have to break. So instead of saying we don't want it at all, because, of course, political advertising might also be useful. That's why in the beginning of my speech, I reminded us of these kind of, early days of the euphoria we all had about the internet and about social media and about the possibilities, for the Arab Spring to unfold, on social media. And it's still happening in Belarus today. So we shouldn't ignore that either. So I wouldn't say that it's not important to keep that in the political discourse. I just need to ensure that the political discourse is a broad political discourse and not only, in echo chambers where false information or limited information is only shared.
Absolutely. To close on a positive note, because we've been talking a lot about the challenges, which is something that we absolutely need to address. One of the questions that we have coming from our audience is about how can digitalization actually help in that promise of the European Commission into moving into this reduction of 55% of the emission in the coming years by leaving no one behind. How do you think digitalization can contribute to this transformation into a more sustainable economy?
I mean, there's a lot negative about COVID, and it still is a huge challenge for us all. But if there's one good thing about it, then it has been a catalyst for our whole digital transition. I mean, I think all of us, wherever we work, wherever we live, have experienced that, because of the digital means, we could kind of continue to kind of, keep in touch, continue to learn, continue to do sport, continue to meet friends, and so on and so on. But of course, it has also exposed the limits if there is not enough connectivity in certain areas in Europe, if the digital skills are not developed everywhere amongst all the generations. And I think that's exactly what you see now also in the recovery money that we are using, where we have secured that in the national plans, 20% of the money is actually used to support a digital transition. And that can be everything. That can go from infrastructure kind of projects, but also a lot into, public administration, make that digital, to make it more user-friendly, but also helping the population to be better equipped for it and closing or not creating the digital divide. So I really think on this one, we have caught up. And on the link to the green, it's been clear that, for instance, when you look at, greening agriculture, for instance, you need smart solutions, and they can be provided via digital means. If you want to reduce traffic and you want smart mobility, again, this can be done via digital means. So I think it really goes hand in hand. And I'm so happy that, with the COVID, we have really made a huge step forward on the, bringing the digital kind of transition at the same level on the radar as the green transition. They are equally important for us.
And we're going to see those transformations moving forward in the coming years with the support of the European Commission. Thank you so much for being here today with us and for your contribution. I think you made a great job in setting the tone for the public discussion that we're going to have over the next few hours. Thank you again.